if you gravitate towards top down or you gravitate towards bottom up, you're fine. You're correct. But why not try to do both? They both take different skill sets and different operation sets, but at the same time, you can find a lot of value using top down and find a lot of value using bottom up. One of the examples I gave is like,
welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and my guest on this episode is Jack Andrews. He's a founder of Unabated, he's a pro sports bettor, and he's a longtime Advantage player. Among other topics in this episode, we talk about how to find an edge in sports betting and how that's changed over the years. Jack describes the tool that he uses for betting the NFL. And then Jack ends with some optimism for sharp bettors that keep getting limited at sportsbooks. The Football Analytics Show is supported by listeners like you. Thank you to all of the kind, generous people who donate. I'll talk more about the Patreon at the end of the pod, but if you're eager to check it out, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. The Football Analytics Show is also brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things: 1, valuable; 2, concise; 3, entertaining. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcasts, an education through your ears. To check it out, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting through analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Jack Andrews. He is a professional sports bettor and a longtime Advantage player, and he is also a founder of Unabated. Jack, welcome to the show.
Ed, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to talk. Jack, would love to know more about your story. How did you get into Advantage play and sports betting from your background?
I started in the late 90s. My first trips to casinos, I was fascinated by it all. The excitement of the casino, the ability to maybe win money. I wanted to know how to get ahead in a casino. I knew that mathematically the games were stacked against me, but I figured, well, there's got to be some way, some system out there to beat it. And that led me to card counting. And I was a card counter for a few years. I was not a good card counter. I was just never really dedicated enough to put in the time and travel that it takes to be a winning card counter. And I kept always thinking, well, what's next? What else is out there? I found card counting. What else is there? And I discovered hole carding, and I was able to do pretty well in maybe seeing the dealer's hole card if they were dealing sloppily. That was an advantage for a while. And then, Ed, I discovered online casinos. Now, back in the day, online casinos were all offshore, and they all had a lot of promotions and bonuses. And that's familiar to anyone who's been doing sports betting in the last few years. The sign-up bonuses and promotions were pretty good. And I started to cycle through them. It was called bonus hunting back then. And I would cycle through them, and I was doing very well with that. And that's how I built my bankroll. And that made a natural segue into online sports books, because the online sports books would also have these bonuses. And sports betting was a little bit different than grinding through a blackjack game or a video poker game. But it was fascinating to me, because now I looked at sports and I said, well, how can I beat this? What is there to do in sports betting? And I gravitated towards prop bets. And I was beating prop bets on baseball, pitcher strikeouts, and home runs in a game, and things like that. And that just kind of kept evolving. And from baseball props, I started betting baseball totals, and that led me into NBA totals. And baseball and basketball were my two main sports. But I like to bet on anything, because one of the things about sports betting that's so I'm trying not to use the word addicting, but is so gravitating towards an advantage player is there's edges out there. You know that these markets are not wholly efficient. And that way you can just dive in there and find the edges wherever they may be using various methods.
That's awesome. Jack, can you give us an example of maybe those early days of how you would beat a baseball prop or a total?
Well, Ed, back then it was very simple. There was a site called bettonsports.com. They went under and stole a lot of money from me later, but they had several other sister sites as well. And so they would all have the same lines, and their baseball props would be how many home runs will be hit in this game, over under two. And it was never more than two or two and a half as their line, and it didn't matter if the wind was blowing out in Wrigley or if the wind was blowing in San Diego. They just always put out two, and
Wow.
so sometimes they would move the juice to maybe minus 140 to the over or something like that. But the lines were really soft, and they had a $200 max bet on those props, but I could play them there, and I could play them at like five other sister sites. Um, and I I cleaned up. I
That's
cleaned up
awesome.
so well that years later, when they went under and stole $40,000 from me, it didn't really hurt that bad because I had profited far more than that.
Wow.
It's a shame that I still had 40,000 in my account that they stole, but I have no regrets of that situation.
Did they just close and then they never offered to give you the rest of your money in your account?
Yeah, well, so the US government for a little while there started to go after some offshore operators, and anytime they would pass through the US, they would snag them. And David Carruthers, who was the president of Bet on Sports, was catching a flight through Dallas, and the federal marshals grabbed him, and they were able to negotiate to shut down Bet on Sports. And the guys that ran it pretty much just were able to take all the user deposits and scram, and the U.S. government wasn't able to recoup the funds. And oddly enough, the guys that were behind it went on to found my bookie, and that's why I always tell people don't play with my bookie, man. Those guys are my crookie.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think that I mean this is just the gold mine of information. I will take that to heart. Jack, it seems like what you took advantage of was I would maybe say bookmaker laziness. It kind of reminds me of even right now. I had Matt from Data Golf on, and he expressed frustration that some of these sports books are just kind of copying his numbers and not doing for matchups and not doing much beyond that. Is that still? I mean, was it bookmaker laziness, and is that still a way of finding value today?
You call it bookmaker laziness. I call it market inefficiency. But yes, it is. Uh, some of these bookmakers are not very good at their craft. And the reason for that is I believe a lot of these companies don't really care about sports betting. Look, Vegas for the longest time, sports betting was an amenity. It was something that they had in their casino so that people would be trafficked through the door to play all the other casino games. And that's the way a lot of these operators are operating now. They just want to speed the plow towards online gambling, online casinos, where they know they have a bigger edge, where they know they can manifest that edge faster than sports betting, which has a pretty much high risk for the bookmaker. So as a result of that, there is a dearth of bookmaking talent out there, and I think a lot of these sites are ripe for the picking. We've seen that in the past 5 years. And it's going to continually evolve in ways that these sites don't know how inefficient they are, because they keep trying to introduce new things and new ways to do things. And I don't think they quite understand the entire risk profile of everything they're doing.
Right. And so, I mean, is there just a lack of bookmaking talent out there? I feel like sitting at Bet Bash and engaging in the panel that had the former bookmakers made it seem like there's a lot of bookmaking talent that's retired and coming back to talk about this. Or is it just that sports betting is blowing up so much in the US that I don't know, they don't care to find the people that can actually do good bookmaking?
So For years, we had just Nevada as a place where you could play sports betting, and we had offshore. And so when the regulated industry came into being, we had a lot of European companies come over. Sports betting culture in Europe, it has always been that sports betting is not a high dollar gamble. And so the US market, who likes to bet a lot of money, they wanted to gamble a bit more. And the European bookmakers basically decided, well, we'll just set up the US market and we can control it from Europe. That didn't work too well. So then they decided, okay, we'll do US side risk rooms. But there's not a lot of people that have experience in being a bookmaker that can also pass regulatory inspection in the US. So they didn't want to go to the offshore guys who had a lot of experience. They didn't want to go to the underground guys in the US that have a lot of experience. They went to the Nevada guys and they did poach a few of the decent bookmakers in Nevada, but it's still a small pool there. There's not a lot of people that have the resume experience to possibly be a strong bookmaker. So as a result, yes, there is a dearth of talent in the industry right now. I think that's slowly being formed and filled because we see a lot of people want to get into this industry now. And unfortunately, if you graduate from college with some kind of analytics degree or quantitative math degree, and you decide you're going to go into sports betting, you may think it's the coolest job ever, right? However, these companies are not paying what you need to be paid in order to pay off your student loans if you're graduating with a good data science degree or quantitative analysis degree. So a lot of these guys that go into the sports betting trading room industry only last a couple of years before they have to go find a job in finance or somewhere that pays a lot more than sports betting pays.
That's interesting. I have so many questions about this. So why wouldn't the European books just go to Costa Rica and hire that talent?
I think they probably thought they would have trouble getting those guys licensed. And in some states they would. It really depends on how invasive the licenses are. For instance, I'm in New Jersey, and New Jersey has always been a very strong regulatory environment in terms of licensing. They go back like 15 years, and they want to see bank statements for the last 15 years if you're going to be a key employee. They want to know every dollar that you transferred everywhere in your life over the past 15 years. It's very invasive. They send people. I know a couple guys that were in Costa Rica that were able to get licensed, and they send investigators down to Costa Rica to investigate all of the addresses that you list as previous employers and things like that. So for a lot of operators, it might just not be worth the hassle to try to get these guys in. And at the same time, maybe they don't fit the same corporate culture that some of these European operators have in terms of their risk management.
Right, right. So more the corporate, the square book type atmosphere, right?
Right, the recreational model. Yeah.
Recreational model. Is there a reason for the invasiveness that the state of New Jersey set for licensing these employees?
They have always been one of the toughest states, and that's why we see so many operators come in through New Jersey first, is because it almost creates a rubber stamp of the rest of the country. Another state looks at it and goes, "Oh, wait, you're licensed in New Jersey. They've done their due diligence." So that's why a lot of operators choose that path. When New Jersey was the second state to legalize gaming back in 1978, and there was a strong suspicion that the mob would get involved, the mafia would get involved with gambling in New Jersey because this is New Jersey, and so they were very tough right from the jump in 1978. That you basically had to be whistle clean in order to get a license in New Jersey. Now that has eased off over the past nearly 50 years of gambling in the state, but it's still a high hurdle for most.
Yeah, I guess everything's legal in New Jersey, right? Sorry, that's a Hamilton line. Jack, you also said something else that was really interesting about these college graduates with data and analytics background, kind of getting into the bookmaking world. From bookmakers that I've talked to, it's not that I don't have respect for them because I do, but it seems like a lot of what they do tends to be non-quantitative, right? I mean, I've talked to multiple bookmakers that still have the 3-ring binders of, however many 350 some college basketball teams that they use every year. So, like, how, like, what How much would you say the bookmakers are using data and analytics?
That's a good question. I don't have enough visibility into the operation of a lot of these books. What you described there was largely that Vegas tradition of being a little bit qualitative, hanging a number that might be wrong, and then letting the sharp bettors kind of pound it into shape. I think a lot of sports books still do that. However, when you get into more derivative markets like prop markets and things like that, it's tougher to hang a bad number and expect it to be hammered into shape efficiently. Just because the prop markets are not enough liquidity to do that a lot of the times. So, yeah, it's tough to say which methods are gaining traction with a lot of these operators. I do think there is this analytical revolution that we're going through in sports does filter down to sports betting as well, both in terms of the bettor and the operator. And as you know, a lot of the bettors actually drive how the operators are going to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the sharp bettors are clearly moving the markets, like your partner Rufus Peabody, who's been doing it for so long, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just interesting. I just feel like, and part of my work is just kind of checking the consistency of related markets. So, for example, NFL win totals versus Week 1 spreads, Week 2 spreads. Uh, they should be consistent, right? And sometimes you find that they're not. And another example, just win totals, right? If you move one win total for an NFL team, that affects all 31 other win totals. It should definitely affect the other three in the division, and I don't think that's often considered. That's something that you could take, consider with analytics, but I feel like you don't, and then you end up with books that have four more wins over the entire NFL than should be that are possible, right? So, yeah, so that's why I asked, just because I do find I mean, I don't want the books to clean up their act with analytics, but I feel like they could.
I totally agree. We've seen that. Look, I've been doing this for a while, and that gap that you just described of if you sum up all of the win totals and they sum up to more than the possible wins are available in the NFL over the course of a season, that gap has been shrinking. So previously it used to be way off. And now it's slowly starting to normalize back down to a more reasonable number. But the public loves to bet overs, and sports books know that. So they're always going to be able to juice that side of the market a little bit more. And that creates value on possibly some unders in a lot of situations for bettors.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jack, you have recently decided to start Unabated. So, why did you decide to do that?
So this actually, the origin of this dates back to pre-pandemic. Rufus and I had decided to start a bettors coalition that would be kind of a voice for the bettor. And we went down this path. It was going to be a nonprofit organization. We had talked to some lawyers, had talked to some people serving on the board. The hardest part about it was going to be the source of funding. And in the end, the pandemic hit, and sports books and casinos that we were going to look to do charitable funding to us were not interested. They didn't want us being the voice of the bettors. They felt the bettors didn't need a voice. And so that whole plan kind of fizzled out. And then after, I'd say in late October 2020, Rufus circled back to me and he goes, "Hey, we've got this other idea that I've talked to a couple other people about a sports betting education and resource site that would be different than anything else that's out there. If you go out and you look for a lot of basic information about sports betting, one, it's going to all be affiliate based. They just want to drive traffic to sports books. And two, the actual information they're telling you is nothing that really helps the bettor. It's all just vanilla information about, here's an arbitrage calculator, here's a parlay calculator, things like that. We wanted to do tools that aren't out there, that hadn't been tried before, or that if they were tried, they just weren't done well. And so we started down making some tools, and we were doing a tool that compared two lines together to find out which one is the better price across markets. So in other words, like if you have one line of -2.5, -110 in a football game, in an NFL game, and another site is offering -3 plus 105. What is the better line there? That sort of thing, which we see anytime you're looking at an odds screen. You always see the different prices, and you're wondering, oh, which one of these is the better price? So that was our first tool, and we added then an alternate line calculator, and then we started to get into game derivatives, like what should the first half line be if the game line is this, or what should the first quarter line be? We expanded into other sports, and basically we created this resource of all of these tools that heretofore bettors just never had access to. And it was sort of like, if you're an aspiring bettor and you need to know these little nuances of how sports betting works, there was no source out there. You would have to kind of bootstrap yourself into learning how to do these things, and we were able to give people a leg up. We were able to kind of be their teammate as they worked into being a sharper sports bettor. And then late last year, we added an odds screen, and we decided, you know what? The odds screens that are out there for most users are either priced out of their ability, in other words, Don Best being $500 a month, or they just don't offer enough information to the bettor. So we built an odds screen that we feel is blazingly fast. We have real-time feeds from many market-making books. We have integrated tools where the sports bettor can use that compare lines and an alternate lines calculator to find edges just clicking through the odds screen. Um, we have I think a very encompassing product now that allows bettors to find value, or at least create their own value by using our tools and our odds screens. And we just kind of keep on building to it. It's a project that'll never be done for
Right.
me or for Rufus, because we're always thinking of new things we can add in there, always thinking of new ways to help people out, get them an edge. And we've built a company around this. That's what's amazing to me, is that Rufus and I have never run a company, but we paired with some people that do that very well. Dan Fabrizio, he founded Sports Insights, he founded Fantasy Labs, Bet Labs, and they're very good at running the company. We're very good at building these tools and putting out content. And we have data scientists now, we have engineers, we have very talented employees. So we have to start charging for it. We put up a paywall back in March, and it's $149 a month if you pay by the month. It's $99 a month if you pay annually. But we strongly believe, like, it's a bargain compared to some of the things that you're able to do with our site. And the feedback we've had from subscribers is just that it's taking their game to a next level. And I think it's a great service for bettors.
Yes, it's really really awesome that you guys have built this. You mentioned part of Unabated is the education for bettors. You have taken the primary role of doing that education, and we're going to talk about your latest video in a little bit here. How did that? I mean, because you also started a YouTube channel, I think, at the start of the pandemic, right? So how was that all related, and why did you decide to get started into content?
Yeah, Ed, for the longest time, I always wanted to put out some better sports betting content for people, and this goes back to just around the time that New Jersey legalized in 2018. I was just sickened by what was passing as content for sports betting. It was just, it was so bad,
Wait, the picks
and it would
aren't
drive.
a good thing?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's a good thing in that it was drawing a lot of inexperienced bettors that were fattening up the liquidity of sports betting. But at the same time, I just don't like seeing people go headlong into a buzzsaw. And that's what a lot of the sports betting content was doing. So I was like, when the pandemic started, everybody sort of wanted to find a hobby or a distraction to kind of get them through. And this was mine. I said, okay, you know what? I'll make videos about sports betting. I had this idea for a while. I knew nothing about video editing. I knew nothing about production quality. And I decided I'll just start with some live streams. And I had a old webcam, was lousy. And I look back at some of those early videos, and yeah, the production quality was subpar. But at the same time, I think it hit a note with a lot of bettors who were like, wait a minute, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's not trying to sell me something. He's not trying to direct me to a sports bet and make a bad bet. he's actually telling me things that'll help me out, and it took off. Um, I've learned a
Awesome.
lot
Yeah.
about video production since then, and I believe I'm not as prolific with the content as I used to be, but I believe there's still a lot of things that sports bettors don't know yet that they need to know. So I'm going to continue with it both at Unabated as well as my personal YouTube channel, and keep trying to put out the message there to let bettors know what they need to know.
Had you done written content before? I think you had, right? I mean,
I was writing for Las Vegas Advisor purely for free. I know Anthony Curtis, who runs Las Vegas Advisor. I've known him for years. And when sports betting hit New Jersey, and he knew I was an avid sports bettor, he said, "Hey, if you want to write some stuff on our site, we don't have a lot of sports betting stuff. We'd like to add more." I said, "Oh, okay, sure." And he pretty much told me right from the start, "I'm not going to pay you. It's just for you to get your name out there and be seen by a lot of eyeballs." So I did it for a while. Just wrote some blog posts for him. But that was the year of my first foray into publicized writing. I had Previous to that, I had been active on a lot of web forums and message boards for decades.
that's awesome. Jack, how do you balance when you're making content? And I'm asking this because I think about this a lot. So, how do you balance wanting to get good content out there, but also not giving away your all your edges? Right, you're still betting as a pro. You gave out, what was it? It was like a year ago that you gave out that some of the books were mispricing teasers or something.
Reverse teasers,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a great example right there. Ed, is I found last year at the start of the NFL season that reverse teasers at FanDuel were priced incorrectly. They were, in other words, so a reverse teaser is sort of what it sounds like. It's a teaser where you give back points rather than getting points, and they pay a higher multiple. So I believe it was a two-team teaser, 6 points. So in other words, moving 6 points in the other direction was paying 9-1. But they were letting you, and so if you look at the NFL spread, there's never situations where you're not giving up enough value to make that profitable. However, they were letting me bet it on totals. So that was great because there are a lot of dead numbers in totals, especially in like higher scoring games and things like that. So I was able to do that and exploit it for a few weeks. And then it ended because FanDuel realized their mistake and they closed the gap. And that's when I decided, okay, well, I'll do a post-mortem on this, and I'll basically kind of go through my thought process on how I was able to beat this. Because a lot of times those war stories that you hear from gamblers are where you get the nuggets of information to help you find the next thing. They're not giving away really anything because the play's dead, but they're able to tell you their war story, talk about their process, and then you go, "Oh, okay, that's what I need to think about next time I'm perusing looking for an edge." A good example of that is there's a guy that recently has been pretty popular on Twitter named Telemachus, as some people like to call it, but I actually asked him; it's pronounced Telemachus, and he's been finding little edges in places and exploiting them very well. And so he was talking about one on Twitter, and then I talked to him, and he had another one that he had a play that he had done at Caesars, and I got him to write a blog for Unabated about it, and that was exactly why I wanted to put it on Unabated, is because it was a post-mortem. The play was long dead, and he went through all of the both his process and the mistakes he made. And I think that's hugely valuable to aspiring bettors, is to find the situations where somebody else has done it and see how they did it, see the mistakes they made, so that when you find your situation, you don't make those same mistakes. I don't think I'm giving away too much value there. I think I'm actually helping maybe preserve plays, because when you make mistakes, you kind of ruin it, right? But if you play it perfectly, man, you can milk some of these situations for a lot of money. So in a way, I'm maybe preserving the market inefficiency.
Wait, so in what sense are you preserving it? Because I feel like you've talked about, when the edge goes away, you're writing about it, and then people can find the next one.
Right. But in finding the next one, they're finding how to do it better. And the better you do something in terms of creating an edge or finding an edge, the less you're going to be detected by the sports book and the more you can get away with. Am I turning people on to it that might not have been able to find it? I don't know about that, because it's an edge that was dead. It's really just the process. And, I think one of the biggest harms to sharp sports bettors is sports bettors that are sharp but do it sloppily. Let's take a look at something that's common for a lot of people. Kiosk jamming, right? There's a lot of sports bettors now that, in order to get bets down anonymously, they go to kiosks, sports betting kiosks at a lot of these sports books, and they jam through bets at a lower price in order to get more through. Whereas if they went up to the window and tried to bet $1,000 on a prop, the sports book would reject the bet, and they would try to find out your identification. But if you go to a kiosk and you jam through $90 bets, and you can get maybe $1,800 down before you finally get limited or cut off, or they shut the kiosk down. But there's a lot of people that are doing it sloppily, and they're going to the kiosk and they're betting, 800 or something like that, and the line moves. You need to figure out how to do it so that the line doesn't move. They don't know who you are, and you can get an aggregate amount of money down in order to make it advantageous to yourself. And so that whole process, that art of sports betting that I like to talk about, is one of those things that people need to learn, because if you're sloppy, you're hurting my earn, because it's going to be tougher for me to do it, because you've alerted this sports book that this is the way that you can find somebody doing it. And so, yeah, it's like I just said, it's the art of sports betting, Ed. It is preserving your edge, and preserving the longevity of your edge is two of the toughest things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense that the more bettors are educated, the more they're going to preserve their edge. And I think the lesson there with the the example you just gave is like, don't be greedy, right? Like, use your edge and take it, and hopefully preserve it for a while.
Yeah, and if you're greedy, find a way to do it so that you're not being obvious with your greed.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So Jack, when did you become Captain Jack Andrews?
So that actually dates back to my earliest days of being an Advantage player. I signed up for a website called BJ21, which was Stanford Wong of Wong Teasers. That was his blackjack community, and it asked me for an alias, and right from the startup. And I wasn't prepared to put an alias. I was prepared to put my real name in. I didn't know anything. So I was just thinking to myself, let's see, Blackjack, Jack. I'll be Jack. Nope, Jack is taken. I like Billy Joel. He's got that song Captain Jack. I'll be Captain Jack. Um, and
Nice.
that's it was born in 15 seconds, Ed, and it's stuck with me for decades now.
So people just started calling you that based on the forum?
Yeah, that was my name that everybody knew me by. And yes, people call me Jack all the time now. It kind of annoys my wife when we go out with somebody that is a gambling acquaintance. She's like, "What are they going to call you tonight?" And I go, "Oh, well, this bullshit will call me Jack. Oh, this person will call me by my real name." So yeah, very different.
It's pretty interesting. I'm sure Spanky's wife has a lot of questions like that as well. Gadoon or Spanky? So Jack, we're heading into football season. Definitely the probably most active time of year for sports betting. Can you give us your general approach for how you go about betting football, whether it's preseason or whatever, what kind of markets you're looking at, what kind of tools at Unabated you use?
Yeah, so for years I have been, I guess, what you would call a value bettor with football. I'm really not doing any handicapping on my own. It's just, in my opinion, it's too efficient of a sport, of a league, NFL anyway. And so I have just been, I guess, top down. When I see a stale line out there, or when I see a line move for injury or whatnot, and I can grab a slower moving book, that's been my process. Now, since we started Unabated, one of the other first tools that we had was this NFL season simulator that literally is what Rufus used to bet the NFL himself for years. And it's his code, and it's basically, you enter power ratings, and then we simulate out the season 10,000 times, and you can specify quarterback, and you can specify injuries to the quarterback, and you can specify dynamic uncertainty, which I think is what is kind of the thing that puts us apart from other simulators that could be out there. And there's plenty of information on Unabated on how to use the NFL simulator, but it opened my eyes to that there's a lot of futures bets out there that are actually quite good. And by good, I mean like double digit edges. And they're not necessarily all in the preseason. As the season goes on, books leave up season win markets and futures markets and sometimes don't quite adjust properly week to week. And so last season, for the first time in my life, I had this huge portfolio of futures bets that did amazingly well. And it was all thanks to me just going into the NFL season simulator each week and running the new ratings. And the season simulator already knew what had happened in the season up to that point, and it was just simulating out the rest of the season. And I believe this year, Ed, we're going to have the power rank. We're going to have your ratings up there for people to use, which I think is going to be amazing. And people are going to be able to find inefficiencies in these futures markets. Now, people always ask me, so why can't I use the NFL season simulator just to predict the next week? Well, that's largely because you're going to find that the lines come out without much edge, because it's basically that's how sports books create their week to week lines, is through power ratings and through using that process and finding the differences in the power ratings. So in a lot of ways, that market is kind of already solved in how you can use power ratings for week to week, but using power ratings for futures is not as solved, and there's a lot of inefficiencies there. And I think it's a great tool, and I plan to use it again this year heavily.
Absolutely. I remember talking to Jeopardy James, and he was talking about how most of his success with NFL betting was in the futures market. And so it does seem like that. I mean, it's just a weaker market than betting NFL size, which we all know is one of the highest liquidity markets, toughest markets to beat, right?
Yeah, look, you can see how much bookmakers pay attention to the market by how much vig they bake into the market, and then they just get comfortable with that. They say, "Oh, look, this market's got a 17 to 23% theoretical hold for us. We don't need to tinker too much with this. We can just kind of let this go on autopilot." But if there's inefficiencies in that market and they can overcome that big house edge, man, there's some really good ones. Like I was cashing some bets by like week 11 last year, season long bets by week 11. Like
Oh
that's
wow!
that's kind of ridiculous. And
Were those
I was actually a little
win?
bit timid on it at first last year. I'm definitely going, use betting with both hands this time.
Right. So I presume those bets you were cashing were like win totals, right? That the sports books still have up.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. You had an awesome video towards the end of last season of kind of some of the things that you did. I'll link to that in the podcast notes. Can you give us like one example of one of those bets that worked out from the simulator?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot to remember something from a year ago. I believe it was Cincinnati. I think it was Cincinnati was one of my overs, and that cashed really quickly. And actually, the whole reason I was on that is because Matt Davidow wrote an article for us last year about using the NFL season simulator. You can still find that article up at Unabated. And he went through his thought process. And his thought process, as qualitative as it was excellent, of course, since Matt's like an excellent bettor. And, he was basically saying, look, Joe Burrow is going to be back and he's going to be fine. He's young enough that this injury is not lingering. And he's going to have a wide array of receivers to target. And he did. And it worked out very well for Cincinnati through the year. And so, yeah, I was a Cincinnati over bettor right from the jump. And there were plenty of bets, though. I'll be honest about this, Ed. There were plenty of bets that came down to like the last week of the season. But the
Yeah.
nice part about that is I was also able to, if I wanted to hedge out of those positions, because my bets were almost all of plus money. And so when it came down to the final week of the season, I could hedge out by betting against the other team, betting for the other team, and a lot of plus money situations itself. So that was another side of it, is the hedging possibilities were very strong. Last year, we didn't have our hedging calculator that Rufus created this year, But I look forward to using that hedging calculator to find out, okay, here's my optimal hedge amount. Not necessarily an arbitrage, but just a hedge amount for optimal bankroll growth. It's a great tool that Rufus created this spring.
That is awesome. I look forward to. I'm going to be playing around with that, and I look forward to finding a lot of value out of it. Jack, you recently made a video about top-down versus bottom-up approaches to betting. Can you tell us about the methods and what were your big takeaways?
Sure. So yes, made a video, came out earlier this week about top down versus bottom up, because that seems to be a debate among people. So just for clarity's sake, top down is basically what used to be called steam chasing. It is looking at the screen and seeing a line move at a sharp market making book and being able to grab a softer number at another sports book, or finding an edge by looking at what a source of truth, such as a market making book, would have on a game, and seeing if you have a positive EV wager at another sports book. The example I gave in the video is, and this was a true life example, last year during the NBA playoffs, there was a game where the line moved from Atlanta plus 2.5 against Chicago to down to Atlanta plus 1. But you could still grab plus 2.5 on the Hawks at a few different sports books, U.S. sports books. And, using the tools at Unabated, I was able to kind of show you, like, okay, this is a 2.5% edge, a positive EV edge in betting this at plus 2.5 versus at plus 1. So there is a little bit of quantitative math that needs to go into that. But top down is very proven. In other words, we know about closing line value. We know about that the markets tend towards efficiency. So we know if we're getting the most efficient price and we're picking off these inefficient prices, we're going to win in the long term without having to know anything about how the team lineups are, or who the best player on the team is, or what their strategy into the game is. It's a very foolproof way of handicapping without having to get into the nuts and bolts of how that sport would operate. Now, conversely, bottom up is, well, the opposite of that. It is basically building a model or building an opinion from the ground up. And maybe you're going by your own thought on how a team's going to react this week, or maybe a narrative, or maybe even some quantitative information about how the two teams match up. And you're almost making your opinion irrespective of what the sharp bookmakers think, because you're basically your own source of truth. And, that could encompass models, that could encompass your own power ratings, that could encompass basically any which way you want to handicap a situation. So, for whatever reason, Ed, there's been a debate. Which one's better, top down or bottom up? And there are people out there that'll say top down's the only way you can go. You're not going to ever beat the sports books with your own handicapping. Don't even try it. And there's other people that say, top down's great, but you're going to burn through accounts. Sports books don't like you. You're going to, flash out too fast, because sports books don't like when you pick off their stale lines. Now, all of that is valid, but that doesn't mean you have to choose one or the other. And that's the kind of the point I made towards the end of the video is, if you gravitate towards top down or you gravitate towards bottom up, you're fine, you're correct. But why not try to do both? They both take different skill sets and different operation sets, but at the same time, you can find a lot of value using top down and find a lot of value using bottom up. One of the examples I gave is, like, maybe you, for the NFL, you're like me. You don't really think you have an edge handicapping these games, but you follow top down and you basically pick off value in the market. But you say to yourself, you know what, but I really like player props. And honestly, hey, the NFL is a great market for a prop better, because books will take a decent pop on NFL props. And so you build a model, and you build it just focusing on tight ends. And you have an excellent model on tight ends, and you can basically beat the tight end prop market. Well, that's bottom up. So you're doing top down and bottom up at the same time. You're making money in two different ways at the same time. And, the more ways that you can find to make money as an advantage player, and this has been a maxim of my entire career, the more ways you can find to make money, the more money you'll make, because it basically smooths out all the variance, and you're more guaranteed to reach your expected value. So I
Yeah,
think the
very
the
cool.
bottom line that I created in this video is, hey, top down, bottom up doesn't matter. Just try to be the best bettor you can, and employ both methods. And I kind of tied it all together towards the end of the video and saying that Unabated has tools for both the top down and the bottom up bettor.
Absolutely. Uh, Love so many aspects of the video. The one thing that was completely new to me was that, the example of Atlanta and Chicago that you gave, with the data that you guys do, you can actually exactly quantify that edge, right? So,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
which is very cool. Like, you can have a lot of faith in, I forget what you said it was, 4% or whatever the edge was, but you can get that based on past market data in the NBA, knowing that if you bet what +2 and the true price is -1, that you can exactly quantify your edge and go through the whole Kelly business of maximizing your profit, right?
Right. So, and really, the reason we do that is because I come from card counting. And the thing about card counting is there's a finite number of cards in the deck. You know your edge. You know exactly how much you should bet. You know exactly what your edge is based on the count. And I talk to card counters that have migrated over to sports betting, and it frustrates them to no end that it's really tough to quantify your edge with sports betting.
Right.
And so this is a method you can use to quantify your edge and be more like a card counter, where the count is this, you put out this bet, and you know your edge is this, and you just sit back and let it manifest itself. With our tools, look, you know that +2.5 when the market is at 1 is worth this, because you're stepping through the 1, the 1.5, the 2 to the 2.5, and you're getting this much value. The line should be -116, but you're able to bet it at -110. And you know that if you're able to bet something at -110 when the true price should be -116, that equals a 2.53% edge. And if you're using Kelly staking, and maybe you're only doing quarter Kelly, you know that dictates that you would be betting about 0.7% of your bankroll. And you say, okay, well, I've got a let's say $100,000 bankroll, then you would be betting $700 onto that play. It's very cut and dry, and I think there's a lot of sports bettors out there that get frustrated because they just don't know what their edge is, and they get burned by that, and they would love it to be more like card counting. And this is a method of using it that is a lot more like card counting.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I just feel like with a bottom up approach, it's hard to know exactly what your edge is. My approach is I use my model and I believe in that, but I I don't tell anyone to just use the model and bet. Sports betting is way too hard for that. So there's a lot of subjective factors that go into that. And it's just hard to quantify your edge, I think is the point. So that's kind of the beauty of the top down approach. And then I would also say that I just completely agree that you should be using both, right? Um, Again, my approach is more of a bottom up with the things that I do at the power rank. But if you're betting on college football, for example, and you're ignoring what the line is at Circa, that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, Circa is a very sharp sports book, and if you listen to when I talk to Matt Metcalf, who does the college football numbers over there, it becomes very apparent that he knows what he's doing, right? So to ignore that top down approach is just not helping you as a bettor.
Absolutely. There's actually in Andrew Mack's books about where you're modeling with Excel. He has modeling sports betting with Excel. He introduced what he calls the Bentor Boost, and it takes its name from Bill Bentor, who's an extremely successful billionaire sports bettor. And basically, it just means respect the market. If you're coming up with numbers, the market should also be an input into your model, in that it should dictate. If you're that far off the market, you're doing something wrong. The market's not
Right.
wrong. So
Exactly.
by kind of regression into the market with your model is key to anybody that's building a bottom up approach.
Yep, I would completely agree with that. And thanks, Jack. That's one of the secrets of what I do at the Power Rank. So appreciate you mentioning that. Um, Awesome. So, anyways, I recommend that everyone go check out that video. It's a very, very clean summary of all that. Jack, just want to end on the betting aspect of it with a tweet that you had. I think it was early July, and with sharp sports bettors, the biggest problem is that you get limited, and sometimes you get limited really, really fast. I've had an experience with that recently. You tweeted out that things could be better this fall. You see a lot more of the sharp sports books coming online as opposed to the recreational sports books that will limit you when you start winning. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. One of the problems with a tweet is it's 240 characters, and I can't really express all the nuance of what I was trying to
Yeah,
say.
of
So
course.
thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain a tweet that was misinterpreted by many. Look, the soft book model, the recreational book model, is saturated in the U.S., at least in the states that already have legal sports betting. And it also hasn't worked. This past quarter was the first quarter where any U.S. sports book turned a profit. FanDuel turned a profit in the second quarter of 2022. And they are the first sports book to ever report a profit in the U.S. in legalized betting outside Nevada. So, think about that for a second. It's been like 5 years and they're still operating at a loss. And they're operating at a loss because the soft book model doesn't work. And I think a lot of anyone that's going to want to come into this market is going to say to themselves, if we go into this market, we have to compete with FanDuel, BetMGMs, DraftKings, and we have to spend $150 million a quarter on marketing in order to keep up with them. And that's not going to work. Why not try a different approach? And that's what we're finally seeing in the market coming this fall. We've got two exchanges coming to New Jersey, which I think is going to be very interesting for other bettors outside New Jersey, just to watch, just to observe how this changes the market. Exchanges are a double-edged sword. In one respect, they're great because they create a situation where bettors can bet whatever the market liquidity dictates, without any kind of risk management limiting and things like that. The downside is they speed the plow towards price discovery. They make price discovery more efficient in the market. So it'll be interesting to see how they operate. We also have other sharp sports books that are coming online. I'm not really allowed to mention who they are or anything like that, but they're known entities within the sports betting world that are finally saying, look, we're going to get involved here. We're past the point where you spend ridiculous amounts of marketing money in order to get a foothold. We're going to come in and get foothold just by being different. And our friends at Deck Prism are a great example of how you can kind of change the game. Deck Prism is putting out sharper lines. They're putting out sharper in-game pricing. And one of the things Deck Prism advocates to their clients is, don't limit people. Let us shape this line. It's a two-way conversation between Deck Prism and their clients. So they're getting information back from the clients as to the bettors that are betting and things like that, so they can better shape their line. They're taking a bet, they're moving the number, that old maxim of how sports betting should be. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity coming in terms of sharp books willing to take bets. Now, are they going to have the breadth of market that a lot of sports bettors have become accustomed to, such as betting on every little nuance of game prop? And some of the props that are available right now are just ridiculous. But no, they're probably not going to have that wide array, but they're going to be able to take bets in markets where previously sharp bettors were getting very frustrated that, like the NFL, like really, if you're not able to take $1,000 from everyone on any bet on a side or total in the NFL, what are you even doing trying to book sports? You just don't understand. And so I think there are some critics of mine that have said that, oh, you're advocating for the death of DraftKings, FanDuel, PointsBet, all those places where I'm making tons of money because they're so soft. I'm not. They're going to
Right.
exist. They're going to continue to exist. Um, there's going to be plenty of soft books out there for people to bet for a long time to come. But I do believe this market is starting to pivot and say, you know what? We need to appeal to more than just the squarest of the square. We need to appeal to the meaty middle of sports betting, which consists of guys that are trying to win. That doesn't mean they're necessarily winning. It just means they're trying to win. And I think it's going to be great for sports bettors to finally have some options where they don't have to constantly be under the threat of being limited or having their account closed.
Yeah, that's very exciting news. Deck Prism is definitely doing some really awesome things. That's Matthew Davidow and Ed Miller, and I believe their book, The Logic of Sports Betting, was kind of how was kind of marketing for their services at Deck Prism, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, they've kind of admitted that over the years, and they pretty much give away that book now.
Yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
good advertising for them.
absolutely. Jack, can you explain exactly how these exchanges that are coming to New Jersey work, like on an NFL side bet?
Sure. So I'll probably put out some videos about this because I think this is a question a lot of people will have. Um, they operate differently. So the two exchanges coming online are Sport Trade and the Profit Exchange, Bet Profit, Profit Exchange. I'm not sure exactly which name they're finalizing on. Sport Trade is a little different in it's more like Lending Tree. If you ever kind of went for a mortgage or a home equity loan or something and you use Lending Tree, it's basically a lot of banks bidding for your service, your money, and you take the best price available based on all the offers that are created. Sport Trade is going to have some dedicated market makers that are putting up prices. They're contractually obligated to put up prices, and um, they offer more like Robinhood or more like day trading, where you can get into a position at a strike price and get out at another price. I use those examples when I'm talking to sports bettors here. They're like WSEX used to be. If anyone has been around long enough to be part of WSEX or Trade Sports, and in which you can kind of buy and sell out of a position. So you buy Philadelphia at 52.4, which is the same as betting it at minus 110. And then you watch the first quarter of the game and the Eagles go out to a 10-0 lead. And now the line is offshore is minus 150. And in Sport Trade, that would be 60. It just is basically the implied probability, and you sell at 60. And so if you had bought 100 contracts at 52.4 and sold at 60, you have a 7.6 times 100, a $760 gain in your bet. And you can get in and out at any time. And I think that's going to be very attractive to a lot of bettors, is that whole kind of get in, get out methodology of betting. Profit exchange is more of a traditional P2P exchange where basically people put up offers. They will have some dedicated market makers as well, but people put up offers and they can buy and sell offers in the U.S. odds method. And the thing that Profit Exchange is going to look to do is have the lowest VIG possible. So if the game is Philadelphia -7 versus the Giants, they would have maybe Philadelphia -7 at minus 105 and the Giants +7 at plus 102 or something like that, where it's just a very thin margin. And hopefully with liquidity, you can hammer that price down to the thinnest possible margin. And that's also why that aids in price discovery for the greater market, is because it's hammering that price down and everybody can see it. And Profit Exchange, I think, is going to be a great resource for bettors as well, because it's going to be another outlet where you can find pricing. And look, not every sharp on the planet agrees in what the sharp side is on a game. There's plenty of situations where sharps disagree, and that should create situations where you might have decent liquidity on both sides. I know the knock on exchanges is that because of the Wire Act, we are restricted to have liquidity in just state by state. And so they're thinking, come on, there's not enough liquidity to have markets in just one state. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think there's a lot of money in New Jersey, especially coming in from the financial industry, which is largely in Jersey City. It's not in South Manhattan anymore. It's in Jersey City. And there's a lot of money there that's just waiting to kind of get flooded into the market. There are some institutional investors that want to get into sports betting trading, and New Jersey has laws in place to allow that to happen. So it could make for in a case where sports betting actually multiplies in terms of liquidity. And if other states kind of follow that same model, the small bettor can still kind of get in there and play with the big boys, because I don't know if these financial institutions are as sharp as they think they are in these markets. So it'll be an
Right.
interesting situation to play out.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Jack, I just want to ask you about the examples that you gave with the sport trade. It sounds like you're essentially creating a market for, let's say, total in an NFL game that's going to probably start, whenever those markets open, Sunday night, Monday morning, and then you can trade that up until that game ends, right?
Yes. In fact, from what I've seen, I've used the app because they're in some beta testing. It is way up until the game ends, and it is like there's 5 seconds left in the game, and you can still make a bet. Which, if you've ever done in-game betting, you know that in-game betting pretty much wraps up by like the 2 minute warning of a game. And the total kind of wraps up around the 4 minute mark. Um, and in some sports, there's a lot of swing that can happen in the end of a game. Basketball, for instance, a team's down by one and they're dribbling the ball up to the court. The other, and you'll still be able to make a bet on that. That's amazing. So the logistics of how that's all going to work, I'm anxious to see, because there could be some situations for positive expected value that we've never quite seen as bettors before.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty cool. And I presume you can do like, season long type quantities like win totals and Super Bowl wins.
Yes, you can do futures bets, and you can get in and out of those futures bets, which I think is great. It's no longer like a cash out number that could possibly be a horrible dollar number to take. These will be kind of a low margin cash out number, which I think is great for bettors as well.
And then with the profit exchange, so like if I wanted to get in there, you use the Eagles -7. Like I could say, well, I want to put an offer out there for, I don't know, -7, -110 or something like that, and someone else comes in on the other side and says, okay, I'll take the opposite side of that.
You put up an offer, and then somebody can come in and take that offer. So if you actually liked Eagles -7, -110, you might put up an offer of Giants +7, +110, because that's the other side of that bet,
Okay,
and
and then
they
someone
take
comes
it.
in.
Yeah, it's sort of like the old. If you ever used Betfair or looked at it, it's that back and lay type of terminology. I think Profit will probably do a better job of kind of making it a more Americanized. It's very confusing to use Betfair for Americans, but um, they're going to have it so you can bet either side. And of course, Sport Trade will have it as well. They just call it like you can buy and sell. You can sell. You can short basically the other side. So it'll be a lot of financial jargon kind of thrown in there for both exchanges.
Sounds good. Jack, I'd like to end the show with a couple potentially non-sports and betting questions. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book, it has stuck with me over time, is a book, Insanely Great by Steve Levy. It's the story of Macintosh computing, focused on like Steve Jobs and the Macintosh and the birth of the Macintosh computer, which sounds like an odd thing to kind of a sports bettor to be about, but it's it's a peek into like what Steve Jobs was really like, and kind of his methodology, and this was all pre leaving Apple and coming back to Apple, and pre iPod and stuff like that. It's just it's just a very inspirational book in terms of reading about how the thought process was in creating that computer. So it's the book. I don't know. I think the book came out in like 1990 or earlier than that. Insanely Great by Steve Levy.
That is awesome. Yeah, I think that was the time where Steve Jobs still kind of smelled pretty bad after like coming back from India. Is that still?
Yeah, there's so many great Steve Jobs stories in there of just like he was kind of like a megalomaniac. Like he was just so he was so bad to the people around him, but it's amazing to read it, and it's all true. And he took the American flag down outside his building and put up a pirate flag because he felt like they were just a rebel force within Apple. Um, and yeah, there's just amazing stories in there that really got hidden once Steve got cancer and died. A lot of the stories that came out about Steve were more about kind of just colorizing his legacy. This is one where it's Steve Jobs is not always the protagonist of the story.
Sure. Well, I mean, Steve Wozniak. I mean, the Apple II wouldn't exist without Woz, right? I mean, he essentially single-handedly created that.
Yeah, and this is definitely after the success of Apple II, and they were basically Steve Jobs was creating the Lisa, which was a revolutionary computer that was just ahead of its time. It failed, and then he got put onto the Macintosh, and he kind of took that over. And but really, he had all these aspirations for the Lisa. And yeah, it's an easy book to read too. It's not long. But I would invite people, if you just want to kind of take a journey down something that might be a little bit inspirational in a nonfiction way, it's a great book.
Absolutely. I've never read that, but I will definitely check it out. The Steve Jobs biography is really good by Walter Isaacson. If you've never checked that out, because that'll cover part of his later life and stuff like that. And then Stephen Levy also wrote Crypto, which is
Yes.
probably one of my favorite. Have you read it?
Yeah, Stephen Levy's written a lot of books that would appeal to the new sports bettor. He wrote a lot of things that are very much about the cutting edge of technology and things that have kind of crossed over into the world that we are in now.
Yeah, I mean, what I loved about Crypto was they talk about Whitfield Diffie, who came up with one of the key things that secures everything that we do on the internet these days. And Whitfield Diffie didn't have a PhD. He had an undergrad math degree, and he got really obsessed with this two-way encryption problem, and he worked on it and made massive contributions. So no need for PhDs. I think you can do great things. So Jack, how about your best culinary experience?
All right. So my best culinary experience. For years I was an advantage player, casino advantage player. I still am. And one of the things that I would like to exploit is comps. And I had a buddy of mine who was exploiting some comps at MGM Grand in Las Vegas. And he was in the final night of his stay, and he realized that he had $2,000 in dining credits that the host didn't want him to know that they were there, but they were there. He knew that they were there. So he's like, hey, we're going to go to Shibuya, which was a Japanese restaurant at MGM Grand at the time, and we're just going to run up a bill. And I'm like, I'm cool with that. So we went. We had the chef's tasting menu, which I think was like $700 a person or something
Jeez,
like
wow.
that. And so, but at the end of the meal, we still had like $600 to burn. And so he calls the waiter over and he goes, "Hey, bring me your most expensive sake." And the color drained out of the waiter's face, and he was like, oh, okay. So he comes over and he has this wooden cask that he opens, and it's goose feathers, and there's a bottle inside, and he's like, there's only 4 bottles of this made a year by these monks in some mountain in Japan, and we have one of the bottles. And my friend says, well, how much is a pour? And he says, well, it's $500 per pour. And he goes, bring me your second most expensive sake. So anyway, we had some expensive sake that was, hit right around $280 a pour or something like that. And that was able to finish off our bill. But it was just an amazing experience of when you have basically a open tab, and what limit you have. And it's basically more than you have appetite for, just to spend it. So the meal was amazing, and that experience was pretty amazing.
Was the sake worth it?
I'm not much of a sake drinker. In fact, I took a sip of it and was like not really enthralled by it, but I didn't want to act ungrateful.
Yeah, exactly. Like for someone who wants to get into getting some comps, like is there any basic advice? Like, should you just find one that's good and stick with it, whether that's MGM or whoever it is, or how would you go about
Well,
that?
yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing with comps is you got to understand the system, and you got to understand exactly what they're looking for and how they're looking for it. Like, there are comps that are based on theoretical loss, and there are comps that are based on actual loss. So you need to understand, like, okay, well, what do I need to do to rack up a theoretical loss? And how do I rack up a theoretical loss without racking up an actual loss? And then the ones that are based on actual loss is, well, how do I manufacture a loss where they think I lost, but I didn't actually lose as much as they think I lost. So, one example could be like you're playing a table game. Let's say you're playing craps, and you buy in for 1,000. And every few minutes, you maybe palm a green chip and put it in your pocket, a $25 chip. And so over the course of your playing craps, when they add up the chips on your rail, it looks like you maybe lost 500, but actually there's a $500 worth of green chips in your pocket, and you didn't lose as much as they think you lost. That's the sort of way you kind of game the comp system. I actually put a video out on that back in 2020. I think I call it like a sports bettor's guide to comps. And so if you want to check that out on YouTube, there's some tips in there, but that's kind of how it's done. Yeah.
Perfect. Jack, last question. If you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Well, Ed, I lost my dad to a heart attack when
I'm
I was
sorry.
just out of college, a little over 20 years ago. And so he has no idea of what I've kind of done in my life. And I would love to just be able to sit down at a dinner and talk to him about what I've done and how I've done it. Um, he knew I was kind of getting started into card counting when he passed away. So that's about, I'm sure that's kind of a pat answer. Go back and have a dinner with a dead relative, but definitely I would love to have a dinner with my dad and just kind of catch him up on the last 20 plus years.
That's a great answer. And in fact, a lot of people that I ask that do talk about relatives. So what was your dad like?
Oh, my dad was nothing like I am, actually. He never gambled. He was pretty straight laced. He worked managing a chemical plant for 30 plus years. And, he was very smart financially in terms of, and that's where I get a lot of my, I guess, savings methodology in my own personal finances. He instilled that into me, but he was definitely not a gambler. I did take him to Vegas back in early 2001. Stayed at a comped room at Caesars, and he liked Vegas, but I could tell Vegas wasn't his scene. Like it wasn't. He didn't gamble, he didn't drink and smoke at that point, so there wasn't a whole lot in Vegas other than walking around. But but I'm definitely a different man than he was, but I still hope I have some of his characteristics as well.
Captain Jack Andrews, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please tell everyone where they can find all your good work.
Sure. Well, unabated.com. That's our site by Rufus and myself, and we'd love to have you come on there and check it all out. We have plenty of free resources. We've actually upped our free game, so there's a lot of things you can do for free on the site if you don't want to pay the paywall. And you can find me on Twitter at capjack2000, and you can find all that great content on YouTube at just go to YouTube and search for Captain Jack Andrews. If you just search for Captain Jack, you're either going to get Billy Joel or you're going to get Johnny Depp. So make sure you put the Andrews on there. And Unabated has some videos up there as well. So you can search for Unabated. And luckily, that's a unique enough keyword that you search for Unabated, you get our Unabated.
Yeah, I'm sure that was very carefully chosen.
Yes.
Absolutely. Jack, thanks again.
Thank you, Ed. It was a pleasure.
Hey, this is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show. Thank you for listening to this episode. I really do try to keep these episodes to an hour, but they just keep getting out of hand, and there was so much more that I really could have asked Captain Jack Andrews about. I really wanted to ask him more about how to get promotions with the casinos, so I'm really glad that he's made a video on it. Lottery time. At the end of every interview episode, I download the list of patrons from patreon.com, and then I run Python code to randomly pick one from the $10 per month level to win the Establish the Pass mug. Passing is king in the NFL, and it's also the most important phase of the college game. Get a reminder of this crucial concept every morning while you're drinking your coffee. This is the same mug that I drink my coffee out of every morning. You can also support the podcast at the $5 per month level. You'll get my sincere thanks, and you also get a patron-only episode every month. If you decide to support the podcast right now, there's an episode on home and rest advantage in football waiting for you. This episode is also available to the $10 a month tier as well, and there's also a tier in which you can buy my time as a data scientist. This week's winner for the lottery is Tom Y. Thanks a lot, Tom. You will get the Establish the Pass mug. If you want to get in on the lottery and the patron-only episodes, go check out patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. Once again, that's patreon.com/footballanalytics. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show, and I will talk to you again soon.